Hello and welcome to the world's best web development course. My name is Angela. I'm a senior developer and the lead instructor at the London App Brewery, London's highest rated programming bootcamp. To date, I've taught over 1 million students worldwide, in person and online. And today I'm so excited that I have the privilege to be your instructor on this course. You're going to get access to over 55 hours of HD video content, step-by-step tutorials, interactive coding exercises, quizzes, and much, much more. This course is created with the same curriculum as our 12-week in-person programming bootcamp. So that means you can look forwards to the same professional level content covering every aspect of web development from HTML to React. This is the only course you need to become a professional full-stack web developer. And the best part? The course is completely project-based. So that means you're going to learn everything you need to know while building beautiful real-world websites and web applications. You'll build a beautiful product website using HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. You'll build games and musical apps like this drum kit. You'll learn about Node, React, and the MERN stack to build classic developer projects like a to-do list app and a project manager that's perfect for showing off at your next interview. If you're curious, take a look at the downloadable curriculum to learn more. Now, this course assumes absolutely no prior programming experience. So if you're a complete beginner, I'll be there every step of the way, taking you from programming fundamentals all the way through to intermediate and more advanced concepts. Now, if you're an advanced developer, then take a look at the curriculum and start at the level that suits you best. So instead of spending $12,000 on our in-person bootcamp and having to take time off work, you're going to get access to exactly the same curriculum that has years of design and testing behind it. So you won't just know what to do, but also why you're doing it. Now, don't just take my word for it. Check out what my past students had to say about the course. Your time is precious. That's why you deserve the best course money can buy. So what are you still waiting for? Join the course today and find out why over 1 million students have rated my courses 5 stars and see what you can do by mastering web development. Hey guys, it's Angela from the App Brewery, and in this lesson we're going to deep dive into how exactly does the internet work. So what exactly is the internet? A lot of people think it's a cloud, something that's hanging around in the sky, it's super complex, super difficult to understand, but actually that's not it at all. The internet is pretty simple. All it is just a long piece of wire. And the wire connects different computers to each other. So you might have one computer that's in London and another one that's in Seattle, and they can talk to each other and transfer data through this giant wire. Now, some of these computers attached to the internet have a very special job. They have to be online 24/7, ready to serve you all the data and files that you are requesting when you try to access a website. And these are called servers. And what they do is they serve you all the data and files you need to be able to access and interact with certain websites. So these computers are called servers, and any computer that a user would use to access the internet is called a client. Now you can imagine a web server as a giant library that's open 24/7, and you can go in there at any hour of the day and say, I want to see Google's homepage, or I want to see the latest post on TechCrunch, and it would be able to serve you with all the files and data you would need to be able to view whatever website you want. Now, as you can imagine, if there's a library that's big enough to house all of these websites, then it's going to be pretty difficult to quickly locate the thing that you want out of this giant library, right? So how is this problem solved on the internet? Well, let's say that you're sitting at home on your computer and you type in google.com because you want to head over to the main Google homepage. Well, what happens behind the scenes is that your browser will send that message to your ISP or your internet service provider. So these are the people who you pay to be able to access the internet. If you live in the US, that will be AT&T or Comcast, and if you're in the UK, that will be something like BT or TalkTalk. Now, the message that you're sending the ISP is, I want to see google.com, and the ISP will then relay that message to something called a DNS server, which stands for a domain name system server. And a DNS server is essentially just a souped up phone book. And what happens when you make that request through your browser is the DNS server will look up in its database to find the exact IP address of that website that you're trying to access. And every single computer that's connected to the internet has an IP address. It's kind of like a postal code for your computer, so that when people need to send and receive files on the internet, each computer can be located and contacted using their unique IP address. And once the DNS server finds that IP address, it'll send it back to your browser through the ISP over the internet. Then you can make a direct request to that address. And what lives at that IP address is, of course, the Google servers. And they'll be able to send you back all the files and data you need to be able to view the Google homepage. Now, you can try this for yourself to look up the IP address of the Google homepage. Head over to this website, nslookup.io, and type in google.com. And they should show you the exact IP address of the Google servers that you can access. So if you copy it and paste it into a new tab, then you'll be able to replicate that process and see the Google homepage show up. So to summarize, the internet is just a bunch of wires that connects up different computers. But it's just on a much bigger scale, connecting up all the computers in the world. But what about the oceans, I hear you ask? Well, that's one of the coolest things. There are these massive undersea cables connecting all the continents on Earth. And if you head over to submarinecablemap.com, you can see all of these cables and see the ones that connect you up to the internet. And these undersea cables are massive, consisting of hundreds of fiber optic fibers, each of them using lasers to transmit up to 400 gigabytes of data per second. This is a cross-section of one of the cables that run to New Zealand. It's an absolute marvel of modern technology, and it looks really beautiful, don't you think? And to think that every single time we load up a web page or click on a button on a website, behind the scenes, we're sending signals that navigate all of this crazy underwater and above water wires. And all I need is just an IP address. And through tiny electric signals traveling at the speed of light through the oceans and halfway around the world in a matter of milliseconds, I get to view my favorite websites. And that is how awesome the internet is. And we're going to be taming it to build our own website and web apps. And to be able to do that, we first have to understand how exactly do websites work. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Hey guys, it's your host Angela here. Welcome to another episode in your favorite show that should really be on Netflix. In this episode, we're going to learn exactly how websites actually work and understand the role of the browser and the different files that it uses to render your favorite web pages. Previously on the Complete Web Development Bootcamp, you learned that the internet consists of a wire that connects client computers with server computers. And you learned that there are special kinds of server computers called domain name service servers, which acts as a big old yellow pages phone book and can look up the IP address of any website you want to access. And when you find out that IP address, you can directly hit up the server computer for the website that you want to view, and they'll send you all the files and data for your browser to be able to render it on screen. Now, the data that you receive from that server usually consists of 3 types of files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's very likely that you would have come across these types of files or these words before because they're so common and they are so integral to how websites work. But what exactly do they do? And why are there so many different types of files? Why can't we just have one file that's, a website? Well, they actually have very different jobs. So, for example, the HTML code file is responsible for the content in your website. So if a website was a house, then the HTML would be the actual bricks of the house. It's the raw materials that makes up your house. Similarly, the HTML file contains the content of your website, like the text content or the images or buttons or links. The second type of files are the CSS files, and these are responsible for styling your website, like the color of the walls or the shape of your door. The CSS file determines how your website will look. So what color will the background of the page be? Or will the buttons have rounded corners? It targets all the content in your website that you created using HTML, for example, the text or the buttons, and applies the styling to those elements. So you could use CSS to make a button red and have rounded corners, and the button text to have a particular font. That is what CSS is for. Now the final component is the JavaScript code. And this is the code that allows your website to actually do things or have functionality. So if you were building a house, this would be like adding light bulbs that can turn on and off, or putting in a cooker that can actually turn on a fire to heat your food. It turns your house into a home, and the JavaScript code does exactly that for a website. It turns a static website, which just has pretty images or text, into something that a user can actually interact with. For example, send an email in Gmail or post your breakfast on Instagram. It allows your website to actually do things and become functional, not just something pretty to look at. So if we take the Google homepage as an example again, once we receive these three types of files from the Google server, we can use our browser, which is a piece of software that specializes in dealing with these files. So when the browser loads up the HTML, we'll get to see the content of the website. So in this case, there's one image which has the Google logo, there's two buttons, and there's a text box where we can enter our search term. Now, when the browser then loads up the CSS files, then it will modify the appearance of those components. So we don't get any extra buttons or images or anything with the CSS, but it will now look exactly the way Google wanted it to. The shape of that text box or the color of the buttons. And finally, using the JavaScript file, the browser gives us the functionality of this website. So we can type in a search term like Google in 1998. And by the way, you should really try this in Google, because when you hit search, it'll turn Google into what it looked like in 1998. So with all these three different files, we get the content, we get the styling, and finally we get the functionality of the website. And combined together is how we create modern websites. Now, with all this knowledge that we've already acquired, we can already start messing around with real websites on the internet. So if you open up your browser and head over to google.com, you can right-click on the button, which is Google Search, and click on Inspect. Now what this does is it brings up the Chrome developer tools. Now Chrome has one of the best tool suites for web developers like us. This is why at the beginning of the course I asked you to download the Chrome browser, even if you normally use a different browser. So if you haven't yet downloaded Chrome, be sure to do it now before you continue. Otherwise, some of the things that I say might not work. In the coming lessons, we're going to be exploring the Chrome developer tools in a lot more detail. But for now, we're just going to use it to do something really simple. So you can see that Chrome Developer Tools has automatically highlighted the part of the code that's responsible for that button that I right-clicked on, that I wanted to inspect. And if we look carefully, you can see that the title of the button, which says Google Search, is actually in here, and we can find it right here, just after the word value. And if we double click on it, then we can actually edit this title for it to say something completely different. So instead of Google Search, let's call it Angela Search. And then once I hit enter, you'll see that update over here. Now you'll notice there's also one called ARIA label, Google search, and this is actually only for text readers rather than for our browser. You can change that too, but it just means that you won't really see it on screen. It's updating something that's used behind the scenes. So be sure to double click on the correct thing. Now, depending on what HTML content we're inspecting on, the part that we have to change might be different. So for example, if you wanted to change the headlines on techcrunch.com, you can simply right click on one of those headlines, click inspect, and find the part that corresponds to this headline, which is right here in black, and we can double click on it to say something completely different. And you can actually change the front page of TechCrunch or BBC News or any website you want to. So this is a great way of pranking your friends, especially when they can see that you're on techcrunch.com and the title or any of the other pieces of text can say whatever you want it to. And this is a great joke to play on friends who are maybe not quite as technologically advanced as you because they haven't taken the course that you have. Now, unfortunately, when I hit refresh on this website, you'll see that everything gets restored to the original version of the website. And the reason for this is because when we hit refresh, we're asking TechCrunch's servers to deliver us the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files once again so that we can render the website on our browser. But when we edit our website in the Chrome developer tools, effectively what we're changing is our local version. And this doesn't get saved when you hit refresh. So of course, then the website will update to the original content. But in the coming lessons, we're going to be working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that you can create and host your own websites live on the internet. And through learning how to code and how to build websites, you're going to be able to make websites that say anything you want it to, look the way that you want it to, and have the functionality that you need. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Hi guys, and welcome to the course. Now, after thousands of students have taken this course, I've compiled some of the top tips from the most successful students to help you make the most of your time on the course. So I know what I do with instruction manuals when I receive them, but this is not it, because I want to share with you some of the most useful tips that will help you learn to code and get the most out of the course. So first tip is, as you go from lesson to lesson in the course, you'll find that each of the lessons should take about 10 minutes long. And this is something that we intentionally designed for the course. Now, a lot of students, when they're watching video tutorials online, very often what people do is they'll watch the video and type along to the code. And this is what we tend to call code along. So the tutorial types a bit, you type a bit, you try to keep up with the pace of the tutorial, or you pause the video every so often to catch up. But essentially, you're coding along with the instructor. And this is probably one of the most intuitive ways for people to learn from online tutorials. Now, in order for you to be more successful than most people, what I would recommend is instead to watch the video tutorials, which are usually, as I said, about 10 minutes long. If it's a 20-minute or a 50-minute tutorial, then stop it at around the 10-minute mark. And while you're watching it, instead of spending time trying to frantically type out the code, I want you instead to just try and understand what's going on, why the code is being written, and understand the purpose of the code rather than trying to type along at the same pace. Now, once you've understood what those 10 minutes are about, what the tutorial is trying to teach you, then to go to your computer and type out the code and try to replicate what happened in the 10 minutes. Now, the reason why this helps people learn so much better is because instead of just copying code by rote, which doesn't teach you anything, instead it forces you to really understand what's going on and absorb the content, and then test yourself afterwards to see if you really understood. So this is my number one top tip. And it's important to remember that we are learning programming. We're not learning how to type fast. It doesn't help you become a better programmer by just copying out code as fast as you can. If you wanted to practice your typing and to speed up your typing skills, then I recommend something like Keeber.com, where you can focus on that specific skill to improve your speed of typing. But what we're going to focus on in the course is learning programming. So we're going to keep our eye on the prize. Now, while you're listening to the videos and you're understanding what's going on, I recommend taking a few notes for yourself to come back to or review in the future. And this is especially useful after when those 10 minutes are up and you're trying to remember what are those bits of code that you had to type and what was the theory that was covered. So one of my favorite note-taking systems is something called Cornell Notes. And it's very, very simple. It just splits a single note page into 4 sections. The top, you have the topic, what the notes are about. And then you have the section of notes where you would write down the majority of your notes. Now, after you write a few lines, it's recommended that you go and review those notes and pick out the most important keywords or questions that you're asking yourself that you want to research on later, or any sort of hints or reminders to yourself. And finally, once you've completed the lesson, then you go to the summary section and you summarize what the entire lesson was about in a few bullet points. So I've created a downloadable PDF of this note-taking system. So if you're keen to try it out, go ahead and download it from the course resources section, and you can print it out into a notebook or just on a few loose sheets if you want to try it out. Now, the next thing to remember is that if I'm talking too fast or too slow, you can always change the playback speed. Now, if you're in a lesson that you find particularly easy to understand and you already know most of the concepts, then go ahead and switch the video player to double speed so that you can cover much more ground in the same space of time. Now, on the other hand, if I'm talking too fast or if English is not your first language, then feel free to change the speed to half speed so that I talk a lot slower and you can take up the information more readily. But it's important that you try to not skip any of the tutorials and any of the modules. And the reason is because the curriculum was carefully designed so that it would be a smooth sloping ramp, so that you start out at the beginning and you slowly make your way through more and more difficult concepts. Now, if you skip a couple of modules, then it makes it really, really hard for you to catch up and to understand what's going on, which is the most important thing. However, some of the videos I will label with optional or skippable, and in that case, feel free to skip those lessons if they don't interest you. Now, the next thing to remember is that if you find at any point the tutorials become harder, and they inevitably will be, they're designed to get harder and harder. But if you find that it's a little bit too difficult, then I recommend just bookmarking it, making a note of which module you really struggled with, and trying to use that method of watching the videos for 10 minutes, reviewing what has been taught, trying to replicate the code yourself. But if you're still stuck and you really don't understand what's going on, then that might be something that you have to come back to. So I find that usually with programming concepts, it helps to try it out, read around the topic, and then come back to it after a week or so. And very often, what was very, very difficult first time you come across it, after you've done it a few times, after you've researched around the topic, and then you come back to it, it becomes a lot easier. So remember to mark things for review that you don't understand. Now, recently, I went to learn windsurfing in Mykonos. And it's a skill that I've never had before. It's something that I found incredibly challenging, and I fell on my face during the entire lesson pretty much. And it hurt a lot. I got battered and bruised, and my ego got bruised a lot as well. But this is exactly what it's like when you try to learn a new skill. So it's important that you persevere and continue to put in the hours to practice and to try again. because you can learn something very superficially just by watching a video or, trying it for a few hours. But in order to master a skill, the most important thing is practice. Now, the final thing is that, I will say it now, you will get stuck at some point, because everybody does. And in fact, I wish that Hollywood would stop making movies where programmers are just typing away like some sort of frenzied hacker person. Because most of the programmers I know who actually do this as a job, they spend probably 90% of their time just staring at the screen, trying to figure out what is wrong, why is it not working. So getting stuck is very much a universal part of programming, something that you have to come to even love and enjoy. So when you do find yourself stuck, I want you to imagine that you're already a fully fledged developer working a job where somebody's paying you to do this for them, because you're the professional. So I want you to use the tools that professional programmers use when they get stuck, and that is Google and Stack Overflow. You try to figure it out, try to see what did other people do, because 99% of the time you won't be the first person who's come across that problem. It's very likely that somebody's experienced it before and other people have helped them to solve that problem or help them understand what it is that they're stuck on. And the thing to remember is that struggling is good. In that moment when you finally spot that typo or finally figure out why it is that your code isn't working and you fix it, that is one of the best feelings in the world. So struggle is good, and it really is through the struggles that you actually improve and level up your skills. So I'm so excited to be on this journey with you, and I look forward to all of your success in the future. All right, guys, it's Angela from the App Brewery again. So at this stage, I'm presuming that you've probably at some point in your life done a tutorial or a lesson somewhere else out there on the internet. And inevitably, at some point, you'll probably get stuck on a problem. Now, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can make the course such that you get stuck less often. But with programming, it's almost a core part of the learning process that you do get stuck and you get yourself unstuck. So I tend to find that when I get stuck on something, I try to see it as a challenge, because usually when I solve it and when I figure it out, there is a huge sense of satisfaction and there's usually some associated growth. Now, having taught over 100,000 students online and offline, I've seen people struggle in lots of different ways. And I just wanted to summarize the steps that you can go through when you get stuck on any sort of programming problem and the framework that you can use to get yourself unstuck in the quickest way possible. Now, the first step is to evaluate what is the expectation versus what is the reality. What did you expect your code to do? Or what did you expect to happen? And what actually happened? So every time you run your code, think to yourself, what do I expect to happen? And then see what really happened and try to figure out what is causing the difference. Now, while you're writing code, it's inevitable that you will end up creating errors. And this can happen when you've made a mistake or spelled something wrong, or even when you're just trying to install a piece of software. And those errors are usually accompanied by bits of text or the error message. And you can see this in your browser or in your code editor. And most of the time, it might seem like these error messages are written by aliens because they don't seem to make any sense. But you can quite easily figure out the human meaning in English for it by just putting it into Google. And you'll usually get lots of different answers as to what the cause might be and how you can fix the problem. And one of the websites, if you don't already know about it, it's going to shortly become your very best friend, and that is stackoverflow.com. So I recommend searching for any errors that you come across into Google and then heading towards the Stack Overflow websites that come up as a result. And this is exactly what real life developers do every single day. And in fact, I've worked in teams where we will all just go to the pub and have a drink and end the day if Stack Overflow is no longer working. So it's all a part of the developer workflow. Now, if that still didn't help, or you're confused by the results that you're getting back, then it's a good idea to re-watch some of the video up to the point when the code started breaking or it started doing something unexpected. Because in the videos, there are always step-by-step instructions, and it's really important that you check to make sure that you haven't made a typo here or there, or you haven't capitalized something that shouldn't be capitalized, and just re-watch the video right before when your code broke in order to try and figure out what might have gone wrong. Now, the next step is you can check your code against my code. At the end of every tutorial module, there is a completed project that you can download, and you can scroll through the completed code, compare it to your own, and see if there were any typos, any errors, any mistakes. And if it helps, you can even copy and paste sections from the completed code into your own module just to see if that line or that paragraph helped to fix the issue. And if that still doesn't solve it, then the next step is head towards the Q&A. So underneath every lesson, there is a Q&A section. And it's a good idea to check in the lesson when your app has broken to see whether if anybody else had similar issues to you. And if you can't find anybody with the same issues, then ask in the Q&A. But make sure that you ask your question in the lesson where you're having the issues. That way it makes it much easier for other students to be able to learn from your mistakes, and also for me to be able to quickly identify what the problem might be. And if you have a question about anything in the tutorial, it's a good idea just to include the timestamp at which it occurs in the video, so I can quickly watch it and figure out what you're referring to, so that I can better answer your questions. Now, when you're asking questions in the Q&A, the way to get the most helpful responses and solutions is by following a 4-step approach. So firstly, tell us, so myself and other students, what did you expect to happen? Then what actually happened? And then include a screenshot of all of your code that corresponds to this situation, and then include a screenshot of the debug console that includes any errors, if there were any errors or if your app has crashed. Now, to take a screenshot of part of the screen in Windows, all you have to do is hold down the Windows key, Shift and S, and then you'll get these little crosshairs show up, and you'll be able to take a section of your screen as a screenshot. And once you let go of the mouse, it will save this to your clipboard, ready to be pasted into Paint or any other application. If that doesn't work for you, be sure to just Google how to take a screenshot of part of the screen, and you'll see lots of videos that can help you with this as well. If you're using a Mac computer, on the other hand, this shortcut is going to save you a lot of time, and it might be worth noting this down in your notebook. When you use Command, Shift and 4, you get this little crosshair that shows up, and you can start clicking and dragging the area that you want to take a screenshot with, and it will save it automatically to your desktop, which then you can upload into the Q&A area for the lecture. So that's just a brief step-by-step process on what to do and how to get help when you get stuck. And it's important to remember that everybody gets stuck sometimes. I've spent days trying to find a bug in my code, and it turns out to be just a comma that was misplaced or a semicolon that was accidentally deleted. And one of the greatest joys for me anyways is figuring out these problems and fixing them. So don't worry if you do get stuck. Everybody will try to help you. And just remember that getting stuck and solving it is all a part of the learning journey.